Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're going to talk about a philosopher who, way back in the super optimistic 90s, basically warned that our politics was creating this huge moral vacuum, and he predicted that something really angry and divisive would eventually rush in to fill it. His name is Michael Sandel, and believe me, his ideas are more relevant now than they've ever been.
I mean, think back to that time, right after the Berlin Wall fell. It really felt like the big arguments were over, you know? The future looked clear, it looked prosperous, and it seemed like it was going to be built on this shared set of liberal values. It felt like we had it all figured out.
But yeah, right in the middle of all that confidence, there was this one voice raising a pretty uncomfortable alarm. This is the story of that thinker, Michael Sandel, and what happens when a warning like that gets ignored.
Look at that quote, just read it. That's the Harvard philosopher Michael Sandel, and he wrote that in 1996. I mean, seriously. That could have been ripped from a headline this morning. He was predicting this powerful backlash that was just simmering right below the surface of that confident era.
Okay, so let's dive into this first part. This is where Sandel was pretty much a lone voice in an age that thought it had all the answers.
So while the whole world was basically throwing a party for individualism and free markets, Sandel was the guy in the corner pointing out these deep, unseen cracks in the foundation. He was arguing that the path we were on would eventually just hollow out our public life, leaving us all feeling disconnected and, frankly, powerless.
So to really get what Sandel was arguing against, we first have to understand the incredibly powerful idea that was dominating everything at the time. And this was it. This was the heavyweight champion of political philosophy, an idea from John Rawls that just took over. His main argument was that a just government, it should act like a neutral referee in a game. It's not supposed to pick which team's values are better. Its job is just to set fair rules, provide a basic safety net, and then get out of the way and let everybody chase their own idea of a good life.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because this chart just lays out the core conflict perfectly. On one side, you've got Rawls's vision, a neutral state for a bunch of free individuals basically acting like consumers. But on the other side, you have Sandel's view, and he's saying, no, we have to debate the good. What he means is we have to actually talk to each other about what makes a good society. For him, real freedom isn't just about what you can buy, it's about having a real say in where we're all going together.
So the absolute key to Sandel's whole argument is that Rawls's theory depends on this idea of an unencumbered self. Just try to picture a person who exists in a total vacuum. No family, no history, no faith, no community ties. Sandel's big point is that person is a fantasy. They don't exist. We are all shaped by our communities and our loyalties, and asking us to just check those things at the door when we enter the public square is asking us to pretend we're someone we're not.
Okay, so this all might sound a little abstract, right? A couple of philosophers arguing, but let's look at how this philosophy had very real and pretty damaging consequences out in the real world.
And boom, there it is. This quote just perfectly shows how that philosophy got translated directly into policy. You had centrist parties in the 90s, everyone from Bill Clinton's Democrats to Tony Blair's New Labor, they all basically adopted this idea. The message was super clear. Hey, we're not going to judge the morality of the market, we're just going to manage the economic results.
The result was something Sandel calls a toleration of avoidance. Instead of having these big democratic debates about what kind of society we actually want to live in, these massive questions were just handed off to economists and experts to solve like they were technical problems. Politics stopped being about meaning and started being about management.
And while all this was happening, growing inequality was leading to what Sandel so brilliantly calls the skyboxification of life. Think about a sports stadium, right? It used to be a place where pretty much everyone mixed together. Now the rich are up in luxury boxes completely separate from everybody else. And the key insight here is that this isn't just about money. It's about the fact that we're losing all the shared experiences that actually make a society work. We don't have those chance encounters anymore that remind us, hey, we're all in this thing together.
And then, to add insult to injury, you have the dominant idea of meritocracy, which layered a moral judgment on top of all of this. It told the people at the top that they'd earned every bit of their success through their own talent and hard work. And it whispered to everyone left behind that their failure was basically their own damn fault. This didn't just create inequality, it created a deep, simmering resentment.
You know, Sandel has this incredible way of showing this in his own classroom. He'll just ask his Harvard students, hey, raise your hand if you're the firstborn child in your family. And something like 75% of the hands go up. And he says you can just hear an audible gasp in the room when they realize it. It's just a really powerful way to get them to question this idea that they got where they are purely on their own merit.
So,
What happens when you systematically strip moral meaning and purpose out of public life? Well, you create a vacuum. And as we all know, vacuums do not stay empty for long.
This was Sandel's core warning, right here. People crave meaning. A politics that's only about spreadsheets and individual consumer choice, well, that's eventually going to feel hollow and deeply unsatisfying.
He argued that by insisting that our deepest moral beliefs had no place in our politics, we were creating a huge, dangerous opening. We were literally hollowing out the center of our democracy, leaving behind this moral void.
And that is exactly what happened. All of a sudden, movements rose up that promised to bring back meaning, purpose, community, and national pride, but they often did it in these really narrow, angry, and intolerant ways. They filled the exact void that mainstream politics had so carefully created.
And here's where things get really strange. Some people have started calling these new populist figures bizarro Sandels. Why? Because they use these twisted, distorted versions of his own critiques. They talk about the dignity of work, the failure of the elites, the need for community, but they use them to argue for totally different and often destructive ends. It just goes to show that the grievances Sandel pointed out were absolutely real, but they ended up being hijacked by the very political backlash he saw coming a mile away.
So, all of this brings us to what is maybe the most urgent question of our time. If Sandel was so right about the problem, what does he think we should do about it? Where do we possibly go from here?
Now, Sandel doesn't offer some simple 5-point plan that's going to magically fix everything, but he does point us in a new direction. He argues we have to start judging all of our policies by their civic consequences. So, for example, we should be asking, how does a tax break for financial speculation versus, say, a tax cut on work, how does that affect our shared life? How does a new piece of technology shape our communities? These are not just technical questions, they're deep moral and political questions that we have to start debating together again.
He really believes we're at a crossroads. He thinks that the failure of the current populist backlash to actually solve people's problems is going to create an opening. And one path from here leads to a genuine renewal of democratic life. But the other path? It leads to a much darker place, where authoritarianism really takes root.
And really, that's the challenge that Sandel leaves us with. We know, now, that a public square that's empty of moral argument is unsustainable. It's dangerous. The question that is going to define our era is, what do we choose to build in its place?